Hello everyone, welcome to Easy Economics. How are you all doing? I hope you all are doing good. Well, today I brought for you all May June 2024, variant 0455, variant 23. We'll be doing paper 2, data response question as per your requests. So let's dive into what the paper has brought for us today. Well, again, there are two strategies once we are solving data response. A, you can first look at the questions and then see what the data is all about, or B, read the data first and then answer the questions that follow. Well, I follow this approach of reading the text first and then addressing the questions that the case study is asking. All right, so let's look at what this case has brought for us today. It first gives us a table in which it has given us a few statistics. It tells us about the GDP of Indonesia. It says in 2021, it refers to Indonesia and the climate change. It says the GDP of Indonesia was around $1,100 billion. The economic growth rate of Indonesia was 3.7%, and GDP of Jakarta, which was its capital, was $300 billion. So, total GDP of Indonesia, the entire country, was of $1,100 billion, and out of that, $300 billion was being contributed by its capital. The economic growth rate of Jakarta was 2.4%, whereas of the entire country, it was 3.7%. All right. Now, like they tell you, Jakarta, Indonesia's capital city, from 1945 to 2024, is one of the world's fastest sinking and most polluted cities. So now they are telling you the amount of pollution that exists in Jakarta. That's Indonesia's capital. Now, the city is expected to record a large decrease in GDP per head, which could lead to a fall in living standards. Now, the fear is that because of a fall in the GDP per head, there could be a fall in the living standards. The free market can be blamed for air pollution and rising sea levels across some areas of Indonesia. Now, they attribute that the free market forces are responsible for the few negative externalities, out of which one they have pointed out to be air pollution, and the other they have pointed out to be rising sea levels. Now, what will happen because the sea levels are going to rise? Exactly, there are going to be floods. Schools and other buildings have been flooded. Roads have been destroyed. Floods have led to an increase in diseases transmitted through water and mosquitoes which breed in water. So now it has also led to transmission of diseases, right? Farmland has been submerged, cutting off a vital source of income for many farmers. This had led to internal migration. What does that mean? People moving from between regions of the same country. Now, because of the farmlands being eroded, now the farmers have switched to different areas within the country only. So now it is resulting in what? A loss to income for farmers, right? For some farmers have moved to areas where the climate change has led to the production of different crops. Now, obviously, the climate would not be suitable for the production of those crops which they would initially have been producing, right? So they would have to switch to the production of other crops. There has been a less pressure on both natural and local government resources in areas which people have left. Obviously, when the population is going to shift from areas that were previously densely populated to areas which were less densely populated, so there would be a less strain on government resources. That makes sense. However, these movements could lead to the collapse of entire communities and increase inequality between workers who are more mobile and those who are less mobile. So again, they are presenting you a drawback. They're saying that yes, maybe now because of the farmlands being submerged, though the farmers have shifted to other areas, however, it could mean that some would have been able to shift more easily, others would have been less mobile. And they also point out that it could also lead to a collapse of the entire community, right? So there could be destruction as well. Again, they've given you a table Now they're saying the governments around the world have reached to climate change by spending more on the environment. So now what are governments across the globe are doing in order to reduce the negative impacts of pollution and the climate change on the environment? They're doing certain steps. The government is spending, right? So GDP and government spending on the environment of selected countries. So they've given you the statistics, how much each country is spending on the environment, and vis-a-vis, side by side, they have given you statistics for the GDP in $1 billion for that particular country as well. Now, if you look at France, its GDP was around 2,730 and it's spending around $27.03 billion. Next is Indonesia, it's spending around 1120. It's $2.58 billion. Japan is spending 5,150. It's around $58.20 billion. Switzerland is spending around $730 billion of GDP it's earning, and the government is spending around $4.02 billion on environment. Similarly, Thailand has a GDP of around $540 billion and it's spending around $0.32 billion on environment. Now, they're saying the Indonesian government has also reached to environmental issues by relocating its capital city. Now, what has Indonesia done is it's thinking of relocating its capital. Previously, it was what? Jakarta. Now, it's going to be Nusantara. Will replace Jakarta as the capital in 2024. The cost of building this new city is expected to be $32.5 billion. So now it has got a cost. This city will not only provide job opportunities, but could also reduce the inequality between the different regions of Indonesia. So now they're saying it will help reduce income inequality, though it would be costly, but yet a plus point is inequality would be reduced, job opportunities would be there. Jakarta is located on the island of Java, which is a wealthier region than Kalimantan. The new city, Nusantara, will be located in Kalimantan region. In addition, the government intends for the new capital city to be carbon neutral. So it's going to be what? Less polluted, environmental friendly. Again, it's a plus point. However, opponents of this project have said that the cost is too high. That's a negative impact. That's a drawback. They have also claimed that the project will only benefit a small number of wealthy and powerful people. Again, they presented you a drawback that it was only going to be beneficial for a few groups, right? All right. So now let's look at the question. The first question says, calculate the percentage contribution of Jakarta to Indonesia's GDP in 2021. So now you want Jakarta's contribution to Indonesia's GDP. So this means what you will be doing, and it's only a 1-mark question. So you've got to identify the variables first. We know how much was Jakarta's GDP? $300 billion. What about the Indonesia's? It was $1,100 billion, right? So percentage GDP would be what? How much would be Jakarta contributing? Let me zoom it for you. All right. So percentage contribution of Jakarta to Indonesia's GDP in 2021 would be GDP of Jakarta is $300 billion divided by GDP of Indonesia, which is $1,100 billion, and 300 billion over 1,100 billion into 100 is going to be 27.27%. You can round it off. It's going to be 27.3%. Once you've written 27.3%, you'll get 1 mark. Hope this is clear. Number B. B says, identify 2 examples of external costs ignored by the free market. Now, if you recall, in the text, we identified 2 external costs. One was air pollution, the other one was rising sea levels. First, tell me, what do you mean by external costs? External costs are negative externalities. What do we mean by negative externalities? Negative externalities are costs which are borne by those who are neither involved in the production nor the consumption of a good or a service, right? So, what would be the examples of any two negative externalities? It could be air pollution, it could be rising sea levels, it could be floods, diseases, or a rise in the number of mosquitoes, right? The question asked us for what? The question asked us to identify. So you can just list down any two of these external costs and you will be good to go, and easily you will be having 2 marks. So all you need to do is list down these two negative externalities. All right, let's look at part C. Part C says, explain how real GDP per head can be an indicator of living standards. Now, real GDP per head is what? Real GDP per head is real GDP per head or real GDP per capita is an economic indicator that measures the average income per person in a country after it is being adjusted for inflation. So you take away the increase of the inflation in order to assess how much has the GDP increased in real terms, right? So what are they asking you? They're asking you, how would it be an indicator of living standards? How would you be so sure that yes, it reflects that there has been an increase in the living standards or the real incomes of the people? You see, real GDP per head reveals the average level of economic output per person. So, in what ways? If there is a higher GDP per head, it would mean more or better access to goods and services by its people, which implies higher living standards. One could be this. Another way would be that a higher real GDP per head would mean a higher income, which would mean what? Which would mean a higher purchasing power, which means what? That now people have access to better infrastructure, education, and healthcare facilities, right? So if the real GDP is increasing, this means that the average level of economic output per person has risen, more access to goods and services, and better, higher income, higher purchasing power means more access to better infrastructure, education, and healthcare facilities. All right? So you will identify one way, explain it. You will identify another way, explain it. 2 marks. Part D. Explain 2 ways climate change can lead to a fall in the HDI of Indonesia. Now they are asking you, how would you tell us that in part D, they are asking you, how would you say that identify and explain any 2 ways in which climate change will lead to a fall in the HDI of Indonesia. Now, first, let's find out what is HDI. HDI was what? HDI was an indicator of living standard, right? That does what? HDI was an indicator of living standard that, besides using GDP per head, considers 2 other indicators of living standards: life expectancy at birth and expected years of schooling. So HDI is an indicator of living standard that, besides using GDP per head, considers 2 other indicators: life expectancy at birth and expected years of schooling. Now, it's a 4-mark question. Now, how have they distributed the marks? 1 mark is for the identification of the first way. 1 mark would be for its explanation. So 2 marks. The 3rd mark would be identification for the second reason and for the explanation of that reason, full 4 marks. Now they are asking you identify and explain 2 ways climate change could lead to a fall in the HDI. So first we'll say floods have caused transmission of diseases and has led to a surge in the population of mosquitoes. So now we'll explain how, thereby reducing life expectancy or increasing death rates. So in this way, what would happen? HDI would fall. Or floods have destroyed schools. So how would it have impact HDI? It would imply a fall in the expected years of schooling. This means again HDI would reduce. Or you could say floods have submerged farmlands. So what would happen? It has affected the production of crops. So what? It has reduced the income of farmers, thereby increasing inequalities of income. Hence, the GDP per head will fall. Therefore, HDI will fall. Get it? So, out of these three, pick any two and then link it and relate it to how it would cause HDI to fall. Get it? All right. Let's look at part E. Part E says, draw a PPC curve to show the impact of climate change on an economy such as Indonesia. Now, we all know a climate change was adversely affecting the PPC. So, what should it do? It should cause the PPC to shift inwards. The entire PPC is going to shift inwards. Now, look carefully. It is a 4-mark question. So, now how have they allocated the marks? 1 mark is for drawing the correct axis. If you label the vertical and the horizontal axis correctly, you'll get 1 mark for that. For the initial curve drawn correctly, inwards to the axis, 1 mark. For the new curve, again, the 3rd mark is going to be awarded. And since you're going to show using arrows, the last final mark is going to be awarded. So now let's look at how I have drawn it. You label the vertical axis capital goods, the horizontal axis consumer goods. You label the initial curve as PPC1. This is the initial curve. Then you'll show an inward shift using arrows and you'll move to PPC2. No need to give an explanation. You'll just make this curve, fulfill all these 4 criteria, and you'll get full 4 marks. Hope this is clear. Part F. Part F asks us to analyze the relationship between GDP and government spending on the environment. Now, in this question, first we need to identify the relationship between GDP and government spending on the environment. For this, we look at the table, this table. Now, first what we'll do is we'll look at what type of relationship exists between the GDP and the government spending. Now, if you look closely at the table, which country spends the most on the government spending? It's Japan, 58.20. And Japan is also the country which has the highest GDP, right? In $1 billion, which is 5,150. Next is what? After Japan, it's France, right? With a GDP of 2,730 and a government spending of 27.00, and which is the least country spending? That's Thailand, that has a GDP of $540 billion and spending around 0.32. So with this, you can deduce that there exists a direct or a positive relationship. The first step to solving this question, analyze question, is you will identify the relationship. So the first thing you will say is that there exists a direct or a positive relationship between the GDP and the government spending on the environment. A higher GDP would lead to higher government spending on the environment. Next, you'll give the evidence. You'll say Japan has the highest GDP and the highest spending on the environment. On the contrary, Thailand has the lowest GDP and the lowest spending on the environment. Once you've done this, you'll get full 2 marks. Then you'll give an analysis. You'd say why? You say a higher GDP gives makes a country or an economy more developed. Hence, it can spend more on the protection of the environment. Or you could say a higher GDP means more economic activity leading to more pollution. This means that the government has to address environmental issues and the government has to spend more. Once you've done that, you'll get full 4 marks. Now, how much was this question all about? This question was about 5 marks. Now, however, there exists an anomaly. There exists an exception. Now, what is the exception? Let's look at it. Now, Switzerland has how much GDP and how much is it spending? Now, Switzerland has a lower GDP than Indonesia. If you look at Switzerland, it has a GDP of 730 and Indonesia has a GDP of 1120. Now, Switzerland has a $730 billion of GDP. However, it is spending $4.02 billion on government spending, whereas Indonesia has a government GDP of 1120, but it's spending less. It's spending only $2.58 billion on government spending. So that's an exception. So far, what had we deduced? That the higher the GDP, the more the government spending on the environment. But only this is the exception, that Switzerland has a lower GDP than Indonesia, $730 billion versus $1120 billion of Indonesia, but a higher spending on environment. So, for this, you can give a reason. It could be that perhaps there are other priorities or other areas of concern. Maybe it has to address the poverty issue at first. Maybe it wants to reduce the poverty level. So, reduction of poverty level is maybe more of a priority rather than addressing environmental issues for Indonesia. It could be, right? Once you've done that, full 5 marks. So this is how you address analyze questions of section A. I hope it's clear. Let's move to part G. G says it's a discuss question. Discuss whether or not internal migration benefits an economy such as Indonesia. Now, when it's a discuss question, again, you need to find in the pros and the cons. You need to produce a balanced argument and justify and end your answer with a conclusion. Now, the key to answering this question is find the relevant evidence from the source only. What the examiners have concluded is that the students, what they do is that they give reasons based on their own opinion and they do not refer to the source. They do not refer to the text, which is where they lose their marks. So the key to answering discuss question is you need to produce in evidence from the source only. So we have identified multiple plus and the negative points regarding internal migration. Right? We'll look at it and I'll show you. We underlined it previously, right? Now they are asking us, tell us whether or not internal migration would benefit Indonesia's economy or not. So now if we say yes, it would be beneficial. Why? Because once we identified it would be beneficial because it would provide less pressure on government resources. Remember? Here it was. Less pressure on government resources. Let me use a yellow color to identify it for you. Less pressure on government resources. It could be that since now people are migrating to other areas, there could be a less strain on healthcare and housing. The labor force moving from maybe low productive areas to high productive areas, and as a result, there would be increase in the output levels. Or it could be yielding to the production of different crops, right? Here. So what would happen? That the production of different crops would mean a higher income level, right? Or it could also be that maybe now the farmers or the workers have access to cheap housing and maybe now they are earning more. So higher wages, cheap housing would mean what? Overall aggregate demand is increasing, right? Their purchasing power is improving. Maybe the standard of living of the people have improved this way. However, it could not be beneficial. Why? Because like we identified, these movements could lead to the collapse of the entire communities and maybe some workers are mobile, the others are not. So again, these are the negative aspects. So here we have identified this only. Here we are saying that income inequality might increase. Not everyone would be able to find a job. Again, not everyone would be mobile, right? Or it could lead to collapse of entire communities without workers in particular areas. There could be shortage of goods and services in areas from where they have moved, right? Or it could be that more pressure on government resources could increase, right? In areas where now people are moving, maybe those areas are going to be more densely populated. Maybe the congestion level would increase, or there could be a surge in pollution, or there could be a shortage of housing in those areas, right? So there could be a shortage of housing, or increase in congestion level, or increase in pollution level. So how will you conclude this answer now? So the conclusion would be that areas that gained population and those from which the labor force migrated needs to be assessed whether the migration was better off or not. It needs to be assessed. This decision, internal migration needs to be assessed. The positive impacts of internal migration needs to outweigh the drawbacks of such a movement in order to assess whether such a migration was beneficial to Indonesia's economy or not. So the benefits must be weighed meticulously against the drawbacks to arrive at the conclusion. I hope this is clear. All right, let's look at part H. Part H is again a discuss question. Again, the key to answering this question is produce a well-balanced argument, both pros and cons of both sides. You cannot only link your answer to one side. Up to maximum of 4 marks you will be able to get if you just stick your answer to one side. So just produce a well-balanced argument. Now in this part H, they are asking us discuss whether or not relocating the capital city from Jakarta will benefit the Indonesian economy. So now they are asking you, would it be beneficial? Would the decision of the economy be wise if it decides to switch its capital from Jakarta to Nusantara? Right. So now let's look at it. Again, earlier we identified. So let's look at it. If we say yes, it would be favorable. Why? Because we identified here that it would provide job opportunities, right? And what would happen? That income inequality would reduce, right? So again, from this source only, I have picked up the favorable points. Now, what I'm saying is that it could be beneficial. Why? Because it will be providing job opportunities. Job opportunities means what? Job opportunities means that economic growth would be witnessed, right? Overall income levels of the people would be increasing, standard of living would improve, unemployment levels is going to fall. So overall, the economy is going to benefit. You see, you need to develop that chain analysis. You need to develop that cause and effect relationship. Overall, income inequalities would reduce between different regions. So what would happen when income inequalities would mitigate? So the standard of living of people would improve. Overall, entire economy would benefit, right? And it also said what? That the government intends that the new capital city would be carbon neutral. So what would mean what? It would mean that there would be a lesser amount of pollution then. So again, it would be a win-win situation. However, it might not be favorable. The decision of the government might not be suitable. Why? Because like I said earlier, it could be costly. Remember, it was costing around $32.5 billion. The opportunity cost would be too much, right? Of the opportunity cost of maybe spending or relocating the capital would mean that the government would have to shift its resources maybe from the provision of healthcare or the provision of education services to the provision of this city. So the government has scarce resources. So again, maybe this decision would not be wise. Or it could be that, yes, like we earlier said, that it would be affecting only, see here, in this source, it said it would be benefiting only small, wealthy, powerful people. So again, I picked up this point only and I presented it here that it would be benefiting only a small number of wealthy and powerful people. So maybe not everybody is going to be benefited from it. So maybe it's not going to be wise. Or it could also be that this decision would lead to an increase in inequality of income. So instead of income inequality shrinking, the income inequality gap would be widening, right? So maybe this decision would not be beneficial. So again, you'd conclude that the decision of the Indonesian economy of shifting or relocating its capital city from Jakarta to Nusantara would be based upon if the positive impacts outweigh the negative impacts or the drawbacks. Then only the government should proceed with this decision. All right. Just ensure that your answer is not tilted towards one side, rather, it has a balanced argument. Because the key term in this question is discuss, so always read what is the key term, how much marks does the question carry, because like I said, it's a 6-mark question, right? So produce a well-balanced argument, develop that cause and effect relationship, put your answer into paragraphs, link it together, brush it off with a final conclusion, and you're good to go. I hope you've all understood. We'll be coming back with more written response questions. Stay tuned, subscribe. Happy learning. Take care.